Good morning, Chapter BNI 15 and all of our guests today. My name is Ron Hornsby and I'm a real estate agent. And for BNI purposes, I focus on Upper Manhattan, north of 110th Street. And I should say again that I'm a real estate agent with Argo Residential. So I'd actually like to start my presentation today with a poll. So if you could use our favorite raise your hand feature located in the participants tab, and let me know if you purchased your first home in New York City. Because odds are it was a fairly trying experience for you. And I can already see from a couple of heads nodding at me and a couple of hands that are being raised that you can all agree with me. So for me, I actually didn't purchase my first home in New York. My first home was actually a flip property that I purchased before I was a real estate agent. And it was about an hour south of New Orleans in my hometown in Louisiana. And yes, you can go an hour south of New Orleans and still be on somewhat solid ground. Now, it took me about 62 days to do all the renovations with my own two hands, and one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. I took a completely uninhabitable home and turned it into profit, basically. And so I returned to New York City with all those profits in hand, and my husband, Chris, and I set out on the adventure to buy our first primary residence in New York City. And we were also getting married that year. So it was quite an exciting year for us. And I'm sharing a couple of pictures of Chris and I from our 15 years together. And we're obviously absolutely ridiculous people. Thinking I knew everything there was to know about real estate, again, before I was an actual licensed agent, but after doing my first flip property, we decided to not work with a buyer's broker when we were looking for our first home, thinking it would save us money. And boy, was that a mistake. We ended up in contract at full asking price in a co-op with a lien against the building and a co-op board that was never going to approve us. We ended up sitting in contract for almost 6 months trying to work it out, and ultimately had to walk away from the deal, losing thousands of dollars in application and attorney fees. But we quickly turned the situation around, found a buyer's broker, and ended up in our beautiful apartment in Upper Manhattan's Hudson Heights. And we actually even filmed an episode of TLC's My First Home, which sort of recreated our purchase process, albeit 2 years after we had already lived in the apartment. But if you're like me and you've completely run out of things to watch on Netflix, you can tune into our episode on TLC app on your smart television. It's called Big Apple, Big Problems, and the title says it all. Now, I tell you this cautionary tale because it was all the motivation I needed to get my real estate license and start helping buyers, especially first-time home buyers, through the purchase process. It's also the reason I've decided to focus my presentation today on the role of a buyer's broker, because it is my belief that when all the dust settles and the market opens up again after this, people who have had that stable employment and income will want to take advantage of the great deals that are hitting the market and those low interest rates. Now, everyone knows the role of a listing agent for the sellers, right? They help figure out pricing, they help market the property, they hold the open houses, and ultimately they find the buyer. But people are less aware of the role of the buyer's broker. And if a buyer is not using their own broker, they ultimately work with the listing agent who only has the seller's interest in mind and might not be great for the buyer. So I know when I take on the role of the buyer's broker, I have two main jobs, and that's to manage expectations and anxieties, especially with first-time home buyers, and also to set my buyers up for success from the very beginning, because there are many steps that need to take place before I even show the first property. The first thing I like to do may seem really obvious, but it's actually quite integral to the process, and that is a face-to-face meeting with my buyers. Ultimately, they have a dozen questions they want to ask, and even another dozen questions that they didn't know they even needed to ask. Plus, it's a great opportunity for us to get to know each other, because the agent-buyer relationship gets very intimate very quickly. Not only do I need to know what you're looking for in the property, I need to know how you live, where you work, how you socialize and entertain. But most importantly, I need to know about your finances. So many buyers think that once they have that 20% down payment, they have all the money that they need to make their purchase. They don't realize all the additional costs that come when purchasing, like your application fees and all the different closing costs. And if they're going to be buying in a co-op, a lot of them aren't aware that the boards are going to be looking at things like post-closing liquidity and debt to income ratio. So it's really important for me to take a deep dive into their finances right away. And the better we know each other, the less invasive that feels. The second thing I like to do is introduce my buyers to my all-star team of real estate professionals and that they might need along the way. And that can include obviously the real estate attorney, also a mortgage broker. It might include a contractor, an architect if they're doing renovations, movers. It runs the gamut, and that's where so many of you guys come into play in my role. And the last thing I like to do with my buyers is get them prepared for all the paperwork that's going to be needed in the process. First and foremost, I'm going to need a revenue financial form, and if they're getting a mortgage, their pre-approval letter from the bank, because I'm going to need those two letters just to make an offer. But I also like to get them started on all the required documents for their purchase application, because some of those things take a while to acquire, and I like to have them up front. That way, when we're in the depths of negotiating and signing contracts, and they're writing that check that has more zeros than they've ever thought they'd write in their life, we've already settled all the paperwork. So finally, it's time to actually start looking at properties. And this is obviously the most exciting time for them, but it can also be the most anxious, because ultimately, are they going to find everything they want and need in their price range? Are they going to have to make concessions or compromises? Are they under a time crunch? Do they need to get out of their current apartment by a certain date? You know, I've been lucky enough to work with buyers who have seen one day of open houses and made an offer off the bat. But I've also worked with buyers over the course of 8 months who I showed 84 apartments to, and that was just the ones that I had in my calendar. But, you know, when you see the look on a buyer's face when they walk into that apartment and know that it's the one, none of that matters. And hopefully by that time, I've set them up for success from the beginning. That way, they know it's their apartment and they can start moving in their head and decorating and turning that house into a home, while I get to work negotiating to get them the best price, working with their attorney on their due diligence, and getting their application approved. But that way they get to the closing table and they don't have any questions or qualms or any reason to doubt that they've made the right choice. But I like to consider myself a full service agent, and that means that my job does not end at the closing table. I love helping my buyers move in and redecorate, and even sometimes do a little bit of renovation myself. You know, with a history of renovating and flipping properties, I bring a unique perspective to every property that I show my buyers. You know, not just of what's there in the apartment, but the possibility of what could be. So you see, there are many benefits to working with a buyer's broker, and even more perks to working with me. Someone who will prepare you upfront for the entire process. A broker who understands the anxieties that come with making a big purchase. An agent who sees the potential in every property they show you. And hopefully a friend that will help you make the house into a home and help you laugh a little bit along the way. So thank you for your time today, and let me know if you have any questions. You can contact me through email or phone.